Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Suzi Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.suzicarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. Welcome back to the Commercial Property Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about why some of the best commercial property assets aren't necessarily the ones that look best on social media. So you know what it's like, especially if you're a resi investor, you will have seen some beautiful before and afters of houses that have either been transformed into HMOs or service accommodation or just refurbished for buy-to-lets or flips, of course. And you know what sells, where you're going to get the best valuation is not only through the size of the property, so you know, extensions, loft extensions, side extensions, whatever else it might be, but also, you know, refurbishing beautiful kitchen, bathrooms, garden, etc. So that's obviously how you add value in the residential world. You make something look better. You make it more desirable to the market, and therefore people are willing to pay more money for it. And you know, that's a real fundamental of value add, obviously, aside from HMOs or, you know, whatever else. But even then, you know, a really great looking HMO will attract more tenants very often and attract higher rents than if you've got something that looks a bit grotty. So it's all about looks, it's all about aesthetics, and you see them on social media, you see them on Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn, these before and afters, and they are impressive. Like, I have to admit, they are quite a hook to look at, but you will very, very rarely see that in the commercial world. And that's because it's not necessarily needed for commercial property. And ugly properties, and let's call them ugly properties rather than beating around the bush, but they can often outperform because you can buy them at cheaper prices. They're overlooked and misunderstood, especially if investors are coming from the residential world. If you want something to look really, really good, it's not about that. In the commercial world, it's about the tenant, the lease, the rent, and the location as well. The location meaning that supply and demand of tenants will be consistent now and into the future. You know, we want demand to outweigh supply. And obviously that's why I talk a lot about niching, because when you niche your strategies, you tick those boxes, you look for those kind of locations. And, you know, commercial investors buy fundamentals, these fundamentals, not emotions, not how something looks. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. So there are certain types of property where the looks do matter. So
this episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited, your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
Offices is probably the best example, where you have grade A offices. You know, the lower secondary offices are really not doing that well at the moment, but they offer great repurposing opportunities. But what I'm talking about is kind of new build, shiny grade A offices with all the renewables in there and attracting blue chip tenants. They look good, they attract the tenants, they've got all the bells and whistles that these tenants are looking for. So there's always exceptions to every rule, but I would say as a general rule, this stuff, it doesn't matter as much in the commercial world. And indeed, if something does look great, does look shiny, really the only reason you want it to look at that is A, to attract more tenants, and therefore B, to get longer leases, better rents, and better tenant covenants at the end of the day. And obviously the outcome of all of that is a better valuation. So, we want to outperform by getting more tenant demand. So everything comes back to tenant demand, comes back to the lease, the rent, and the tenant covenant. And, this is a great opportunity because even though a lot of people want to look for something that looks really good, there's great opportunities coming from assets that don't look pretty, that but are highly functional and for which there's actually a lot of tenant demand. So, let's delve into that, because there's certain types of property where this is definitely more prevalent. You're going to get higher value add than others. So when we're in the commercial world, our tenants are businesses, and we need to understand what businesses want. And businesses want location. Now, different types of businesses have different locational requirements. So if you are in an industrial operator, then you probably want access to arterial roads and motorways. That is kind of one of the fundamentals of some industrial properties, of businesses. And then what you also want is you want access to workers, people to work in your operation. So, places where there's lots of chimney pots, lots of, maybe not high-end housing, but just standard housing where there's going to be lots and lots of workers. You want great access and egress, so you can get lorries or vans in and out. You want maybe a mix of offices and warehousing space and probably a decent eaves height so you can put your racking in there. They're the fundamentals, and none of that looks great on social media. None of that is particularly sexy. Location requirements for offices can quite often be near skilled workforces, or let's face it, sometimes it's just near the managing director's house. So that's why they want to locate there. Retail, it's all about footfall. It's about the number of people passing their door so that they're going to come in and shop. And so that's why, prime locations with lots of the brands clustered together. That's why shopping centres historically have worked, because you get them all under one roof and you kind of get captive footfall. So all very, very different in terms of location. And then you've got all the other factors, some of which I alluded to, like access, parking, loading capability for industrial in particular, operational efficiency, parking spaces, circulation space, affordability, visibility, customer access and staff access, the practicality of the property for your particular operation. And so, very often a basic industrial building with excellent access and strong demand might outperform a beautiful looking office building, especially if there isn't a lot of demand for the office. So, commercial property is primarily a economic decision, not an emotional one. And as I say, some of the, you may need to do some refurbishment works or subdivision works. Sometimes something will let quicker, a building will let quicker if you arrange it properly and maybe put a lick of paint on it. But we're not talking, high-end aesthetics. We're talking about a tenant coming in and thinking, oh, I could move in there quite quickly, rather than thinking, gosh, I'm going to have to do, 10 grand's worth of work to get this up to scratch. So we want to make it easy for tenants, but we don't want to overpay. And of course, if you overpay, if you try and fit the unit out, hoping that a tenant will come, actually you could be shooting yourself in the foot in commercial. And that's because a lot of tenants have their own branding, they have their own corporate fit out, especially kind of the brands and big companies. And actually, if you were to go in and fit the property out, thinking that you're going to get it let quicker, actually, some companies might think, God, that's actually going to cost me more because I'm going to have to take all that out because I need to put my own aesthetics in, my own fit out in there. And so actually, a lot of businesses see past the fact that you might have left it, we call it white boxing, where you just prepare it ready for the tenant's fit out. They're quite happy with that because they can see past that. They can see that they can put their fit out in, and actually they can operate well from that particular property. And there's certain types of property where you might need a bit more attention. You might maybe need a few more facilities, but this is where commercial agents can really help you, because they'll, you can ask them what's required in the market to let that particular property. And very often in the commercial world, you have really, really unsexy businesses. So, things like, the heavy industrial, things like self-storage, waste, all of these are highly, highly profitable businesses very often, but they don't look great. The aesthetics are not great. And so this is why kind of in sectors where there's high tenant demand, sometimes unattractive commercial properties can often outperform because you have fewer competing buyers for them. You've got less emotional bidding because it's not about how it looks. You've got overlooked opportunities, stronger yields. Definitely these are things are misunderstood by inexperienced investors, that's for sure. You have hidden asset management potential that might be hiding behind the aesthetics, and probably operational improvements available as well. Sometimes you can actually improve a property just by widening access or providing more parking spaces, and suddenly it becomes more attractive to a wider market. And so the fundamentals of choosing your niche in commercial is kind of really getting under the skin of what businesses want. It's not kind of making a building look amazing, although, on the odd occasion that might be needed. But it's about understanding what businesses are looking for and catering for that. So, if the properties that are letting in small industrial space there's a sweet spot, say between 1.5 and 3,000 square feet, you might want to subdivide space. You might want to provide more parking spaces. You might want to improve the access. You might want to put a mezzanine floor in to provide offices, whatever it might be. So you could be looking at repurposing tired secondary offices into smaller suites. You might look at storage yards, trade counters, scruffy industrial estates, tired retail where you can, maybe repurpose the uppers or, even repurpose the retail, older roadside assets, which could be improved, or, land let to roadside retailers. So, when things are pretty, when things look good, often pricing can become competitive. So, there is definitely more blue ocean where things look a bit more shabby, but there's lots of tenant demand. And of course, there's a big caveat here, because if something looks shabby and there's no tenant demand, then, that's obviously a warning sign. But if you can do something to the unit, if you can force value through, if you can change the unit to be more attractive to a wider group of tenants, then obviously that is good asset management. That means you're going to get in value enhancement. So commercial values are often created on paper, and, without physically changing the building. And that might be lease restructures, lease extensions, rent review, removing tenants' break clauses, letting vacant space, title splitting, improving tenant mix, lengthening leases, improving the weighted average unexpired lease term, or the WALT, planning gain, improving tenant covenants, change of views perhaps. So, these are all paper-based, and they can have a major impact on valuation. And a bit of a top tip for you is that when you're, if you're buying a property and you're intending to force that value through, you're intending to add value through your own asset management, then you can ask valuers your broker to ask your valuer to put special assumptions in, which basically gives you a before and after value. So, I'm buying it now at this value. If I change all the leases to 5-year leases, for example, kind of where would the value be? So you can ask valuers to put that into your valuation report. And so we find ourselves in a market where technically there should be lots of motivated sellers, but we're still seeing quite a big gap between buyers and sellers. So, sellers and their selling agents are, selling for high asking prices that a lot of buyers are just not willing to pay. And so if you, and if you're buying these kind of sexy assets, then, you're definitely going to see higher asking prices and less willingness from vendors to come down. Whereas if you're looking at these kind of slightly more shabby properties, then you may well get better pricing in that particular space, especially actually if it doesn't look great, but the potential to improve it is significant. Like you could let a vacant unit or extend a lease or do a very light refurbishment to, let the property to a wider range of tenants. A client of mine bought a property in an auction, and there was a retail unit as part of it, and it had been on the market for a year. Now, it had been on with the wrong agent, but it just needed a quick lick of paint. He spent £3,000 on a lick of paint, and it let within 4 weeks. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. We're not talking about improving it massively. And, as investors, what we're looking for is resilient tenant demand, secure income, operationally useful buildings and assets with repositioning potential, multiple exits. That's what we want to look for. So if you're coming from the residential world, you might be looking for properties that you could visually transform, focus on decor and appearance, and perhaps judge opportunities too quickly. And the skill in kind of that transition is focusing more on income streams, is tenant and tenant covenant, the quality of your tenant. Definitely supply and demand, and now and in the future, is it a resilient sector? So we're seeing, for example, a lot of quite shabby industrial units. Actually, there's lots of demand, and you can see that they're going to be quite AI proof as well, because they are, they're workshops, they're more physical, hands-on businesses. You'd be focusing more on tenant quality and future asset management potential. So that's everything that we want to look at. So don't expect, I have a bit of a laugh with my board members because, we're looking at this stuff and it just isn't sexy. It's just, some of it's not attractive, but some of the returns that some of these deals are kicking off are attractive. And that is the key. I would rather every day of the week have something that doesn't look sexy, but I'm seeing really fantastic returns. And that is the name of the game. So investors who are building some serious long-term wealth in commercial property, unless you're right at the trophy asset end of the market, they're rarely chasing the prettiest buildings. What they're looking for is properties where there's great tenant demand and where they can add value through asset management. They can force value through. They're looking for strong fundamentals, strong tenant demand, low supply of similar buildings, secure income ideally, or the ability to create secure income, and often opportunities that other people just miss. And often these opportunities are just the least Instagrammable in the market. You're never going to see a commercial investor putting some sexy before and afters on Instagram, because it's just not going to happen. So this is something I work with my clients on a lot, the different strategies that you can use. And, there's very well-worn path in terms of the different strategies that you can use to add value and turn assets into something where there's little tenant demand to where there's lots and lots of tenant demand. And really, that's one of the keys of getting your money out of commercial deals and adding significant amount of value. And if you listen to some of the other episodes of Commercial Property Podcast, you will hear me talking about some of those as well. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Commercial Property Podcast.